What family tradition ruined your family? In our family, women needed male approval to seek medical help. I organizing Uncle Rashid's promotion party when I felt that familiar tingling in my fingers. I'd been seizure-free for 3 months, but I knew what was coming. Uncle Rashid. I gripped the table as the room started spinning. I need my medication. Please. Seizure coming. He didn't even glance up from his LinkedIn speech cards. Amira, we discussed this. No female dramatics during my Silicon Valley celebration. It's not dramatics, I have epilepsy. Hannah! He called across the room. Does Amira look sick to you? Hannah, his perfect daughter, barely glanced over. She's probably jealous about your promotion, Baba. She always gets sick during important events. See? Uncle Rashid smoothly pocketed my emergency medication from my purse. This is why men must approve women's medical decisions. You manipulate with fake illness. The zigzag lights were starting now, flashing at the edges of my vision. 10 minutes. That's all I had before my brain would misfire completely. The number my neurologist made me memorize. This isn't fake. My voice shook as the room tilted more. Mom believed me before she died. Your mother was weak. Uncle Rashid's voice boomed. She pampered you with Western doctors, making you soft. In Pakistan, we don't coddle attention seekers. The gathering relatives murmured agreement. My younger brother Yusuf tried to speak up, but her neurologist said, "Silence." Uncle Rashid pointed at him. Men support men in this family. Don't let her manipulate you with this performance. The tingling now felt like thousands of needles stabbing through my nerves. 7 minutes left. Please, I begged. Just let me take 1 pill. I'll go to my room after. I won't ruin your party. You're ruining it now with this scene. He turned to my aunt. See how she escalates? First she claims illness, then negotiates like a businessman. My aunt shifted uncomfortably. Rashid, perhaps we should just let her. Did I ask for female opinion? His voice turned ice cold. Know your place. 5 minutes. The flashing lights were so bright now I could barely see faces. My hands had started that uncontrollable trembling. Look at her shaking! My cousin Aisha, who was pre-med, stood up alarmed. Uncle, those are involuntary movements. Don't you start. He rounded on her. Another woman corrupted by American education. She's controlling those movements. But I wasn't. The tremors were spreading up my arms like electricity finding a path. My jaw was starting to clench against my will. Please, listen to her. Uncle Rashid addressed the room like a professor, describing symptoms to sound convincing. This is exactly what she did at her high school graduation. That was a real seizure, Yusuf shouted. She was hospitalized for 2 days. Because the doctors here believe women's lies. Uncle Rashid waved dismissively. Wasting insurance money on female hysteria. That's when every muscle in my body went rigid at once, like being electrocuted from the inside. The last thing I managed was a strangled help before my body betrayed me completely. My body started jerking violently, completely out of my control, arms and legs thrashing in ways that weren't humanly possible. She's having a grand mal, Aisha screamed, dropping to her knees beside me. Someone time this. She's faking. Uncle Rashid stood over me as my body convulsed. Very convincingly, but still faking. Don't encourage her. White foam was building at my mouth. My eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. The violent spasms sent flowers flying across the floor. This isn't fake. Yusuf was sobbing. Call 911. No one touches a phone without my permission, Uncle Rashid bellowed. She could die. Aisha was trying to turn me on my side as I convulsed. The room erupted in chaos. Half the family wanted to help, the other half too conditioned to challenge male authority. I could feel my consciousness slipping. If it goes past 5 minutes, she could have brain damage. Aisha was fighting to get back to me. This is a medical emergency. Then perhaps she'll learn her lesson about seeking attention, Uncle Rashid said. But even his voice cracked as my lips turned blue from lack of oxygen. That's when his boss walked in. The executive froze in the doorway, taking in the scene. What the absolute hell? Don't mind her, she's just pretending, Uncle Rashid started. Pretending? The boss was already dialing 911. That's a grand mal seizure. In our culture, men must approve. I don't give a damn about your twisted version of culture. The boss shoved past him. Yes, 911? Adult woman in active seizure going on 4 minutes. The seizure lasted 7 minutes total. The paramedics said another minute and I might not have made it. Uncle Rashid tried damage control at the hospital, claimed he was following cultural protocols. But his boss had seen everything. The job offer was rescinded that night. He lost everything he'd built his identity on. But that wasn't enough for what he'd put me through. The real consequences were just beginning. The first thing I noticed was the beeping. Steady electronic sounds pulling me out of darkness. My eyes felt heavy, like someone had glued them shut. I forced them open and saw white ceiling tiles with those ugly fluorescent lights. Hospital smell hit me next. That mix of bleach and something medical. Movement in the corner caught my attention. Yusuf was hunched over in a plastic chair, shoulders shaking. He was crying. The neurologist stood next to him with a clipboard, speaking in that serious doctor voice. Another minute without medication, and she could have had permanent brain damage. She paused and looked at my chart. Or worse. Yusuf's head snapped up when he heard me trying to sit up. His eyes were red and puffy. He practically jumped out of the chair and grabbed my hand. The monitors started beeping faster. A nurse rushed in to check the machines. 2 paramedics in dark blue uniforms appeared in the doorway. They were the ones from last night. The taller one stepped closer to my bed. We wanted to check on you before our shift ends. His partner nodded and crossed his arms. In 15 years doing this job, Watching someone deny medication during an active seizure was one of the worst things we've seen. They stayed for a few more minutes, checking my vitals and making sure I was stable. After they left, Yusuf squeezed my hand tighter. I should have fought him harder. His voice cracked. I should have grabbed the medication from his pocket. I tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, but my throat felt raw. He kept talking, making promises about never letting anyone hurt me again. The door opened and Aisha rushed in carrying a folder. Her hair was messy and she had the same clothes from yesterday. Dark circles under her eyes showed she hadn't slept. She pulled out pages covered in her neat handwriting. I documented everything. Her hands shook as she handed me the papers. The exact timing, everything Uncle said, who was there, what they did or didn't do. She'd been up all night writing it down like a medical report. My phone started buzzing on the bedside table. Yusuf reached for it and his face went dark. He showed me the screen. Family group messages were flooding in. Uncle was telling everyone his boss overreacted. He called it American ignorance about our culture. Some relatives were agreeing with him. Others stayed quiet. The doctor came back and explained they needed to keep me another day. 7 minutes was a long seizure. She used the word postictal and explained about recovery phases. A nurse brought pamphlets about seizure triggers and safety plans. She showed me breathing exercises and taught me warning signs to watch for. More messages kept coming through. The family WhatsApp group was exploding. Older uncles defended Uncle, saying women always exaggerate illness for attention. A few younger cousins suggested maybe denying medication wasn't okay. They got shut down fast. My aunt sent a private text asking if I was really okay. She wouldn't say anything in the main group though. Too scared. Lying there with tubes in my arm, I kept thinking about Mom. She took me to get diagnosed when I was 15. The family was furious about Western doctors. They said she was wasting money on fake problems. But she stood up to them. She drove me to every appointment. She made sure I had medication. She believed me when nobody else would. The phone rang and Yusuf answered. His face went white. Uncle was on the other end. I could hear his angry voice through the speaker. He ordered Yusuf to make me drop any complaints. Threatened to cut him off from the family. Said he'd lose his inheritance if he didn't control his sister. Yusuf looked at me, then at the phone. He hung up. First time in his life he'd ever hung up on Uncle. The discharge nurse came with paperwork the next morning. She gave me 3 prescription bottles. One for your purse, one for your bedroom, and you should hide one somewhere safe. She looked at Yusuf. Make sure someone you trust knows where it is. We both nodded. I wasn't going to be caught without medication ever again. The nurse wheeled me to the hospital entrance while Yusuf got the car. 3 sets of medication in my bag felt like armor. Uncle had taken 1 bottle, but he couldn't take 3. He couldn't control me if I was prepared. Yusuf helped me into the passenger seat and we drove home in silence. Both of us knew everything had changed. The family would never be the same, but at least I was alive. At least this time, someone had called 911 before it was too late. 2 days after getting home, my phone rang while I was sorting through my medications. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized the area code from Uncle's work. His former boss wanted to talk about filing a formal statement for their HR records. She explained that what happened at the party could affect more than just his termination. There might be legal implications for the company if they didn't document everything properly. She asked if I'd be willing to write down exactly what happened. I told her I needed to think about it. My hands were already shaking just from the phone call. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her request. I pulled out my laptop and started typing. First, just the medical facts. The tingling in my fingers at 7:43 p.m. The visual disturbances at 7:46. Uncle taking my medication at 7:48. The seizure starting at 7:53. But then more came pouring out. How he'd called me a liar. How Hannah backed him up. How half the family just stood there watching while I convulsed on the floor. My fingers kept hitting the wrong keys because they were trembling so bad. I saved the document 3 times to make sure I wouldn't lose it. 4 pages turned into 8. 8 turned into 12. Every detail I could remember went into that document. The way the foam tasted metallic in my mouth. How my muscles felt like they were tearing apart. The terror of being conscious but unable to control my own body. I emailed it to myself and saved copies on 2 flash drives. Around 3 a.m. I gave up trying to sleep. Every car door slamming outside made me jump. Every sudden noise sent my heart racing. I kept checking my pulse, convinced I felt that tingling starting again. I took my medication early just to be safe. Then checked the bottle 3 more times to make sure I'd actually taken it. The fear of having another seizure without help was keeping me wired. I turned on every light in my room and sat against the wall where I could see the door. Yusuf found me there in the morning, still awake, surrounded by empty water bottles and my medication lined up on the nightstand. The next afternoon, someone knocked on our door. Ross Kerr introduced himself as a social worker from the hospital. He had a folder with my name on it and asked if we could talk about safety planning. He sat at our kitchen table and pulled out forms about medical abuse. He explained that what Uncle did qualified as medical neglect and possibly attempted murder. Adult Protective Services could get involved if I wanted. He gave me pamphlets about emergency housing, legal aid, and victim resources. His card had 3 different phone numbers on it. He said I could call any of them, anytime if I felt unsafe. After he left, I went online to look at apartments. Yusuf and I had talked about moving out before, but never seriously. The cheapest studio I could find was $1,400 a month. Our combined income from my part-time job and his weekend shifts would barely cover $1,200. Even if we both picked up extra hours, we'd have nothing left for food or my medication. The security deposits alone would wipe out our savings. I bookmarked 12 listings anyway, just in case. Meanwhile, Uncle wasn't staying quiet. My cousin texted me screenshots from the family WhatsApp group. Uncle was telling everyone I'd planned the whole thing, said I was jealous of his success, and faked the seizure to ruin his promotion. He claimed the hospital records were falsified because American doctors believed any story a woman told them. Hannah posted on Instagram about standing by her father during this difficult time. She called me manipulative and ungrateful after everything Uncle had done for us since Mom died. 67 people liked her post. 3 of them were my cousins. I screenshot everything from my records. The next morning, I drove back to the hospital. The records department was in the basement, past the cafeteria. I explained to the clerk that I needed official copies of everything from my emergency visit. She looked at my face and seemed to understand. She expedited my request and had everything printed within an hour. The stack was thicker than I expected. Paramedic reports, emergency room intake, blood work results, EEG readings, proof that I wasn't lying. I made 3 copies at the library and put them in different places. The day after that, my neurologist's office called. They'd had a cancellation and could fit me in immediately. When I got there, she was already angry. She'd gotten the hospital reports. She pulled up my medical history on her computer, going back 5 years to my first diagnosis. Then she started typing a letter. Her fingers hit the keys hard. The letter detailed my epilepsy diagnosis, my medication requirements, and stated clearly that denying my medication during an active seizure was life-threatening. She printed 3 copies and signed each one. She told me to keep them safe. I was walking to my car after the appointment when I heard shouting. Uncle was standing by the hospital entrance, his face red. He yelled that I was destroying our family, that I was bringing shame on our name, that no one would want to marry me now. Security guards started walking toward us. He kept screaming about how I'd ruined his life, how I was an ungrateful brat who killed her mother with stress. The guards told him to leave. He wouldn't stop yelling. They had to physically escort him to his car while he shouted about family honor. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to drive. That evening, Yusuf asked to speak with the male elders. They gathered in our uncle's living room, expecting him to talk sense into me. Instead, he stood up and announced he was standing with me. The room exploded. They called him weak, said he was controlled by women, accused him of betraying his own blood. He stayed calm and said he'd rather be weak than watch his sister die. The room went completely silent. Nobody knew what to say to that. The next morning, I made an appointment with legal aid downtown. The office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax place. The lawyer, a tired-looking woman with stacks of papers everywhere, listened to my story while typing notes. She stopped typing when I got to the part about Uncle denying my medication during the seizure. She asked if I had any texts or voicemails where he threatened me directly. I showed her the family WhatsApp messages, but she shook her head. She explained that medical neglect during an emergency might not meet the legal standard for a restraining order. The judge would want to see documented threats of violence or actual physical harm. She seemed frustrated with the system as she printed out the forms anyway. We filled them out together, but she warned me not to get my hopes up. While I was sitting in the parking lot afterward, my phone buzzed with an email from Uncle's former boss. She'd heard about the family drama through mutual contacts and wanted to help. She wrote that she'd testify in court if needed about what she witnessed that night. She mentioned the company was reviewing their policies about reporting witnessed abuse because of what happened. She said watching someone deny medication to a person having a seizure was one of the worst things she'd ever seen. I forwarded the email to the legal aid lawyer immediately. That afternoon, I worked on my written statement for the company's HR department. I sat at my laptop for 3 hours typing out every detail of how Uncle endangered my life. I included the timeline of my seizure symptoms, his refusal to give me medication, and how he prevented others from calling 911. I attached copies of my medical records showing my epilepsy diagnosis. The HR representative called me back within an hour of receiving it. She confirmed my statement would become part of Uncle's permanent record if he ever tried to reapply. She also said they were adding my case to their training materials about recognizing medical abuse. 2 days later, my aunt showed up at our house without warning. She brought homemade samosas and chai like nothing had happened. She sat in our living room talking about how the whole community was gossiping about our family. She said I was ruining my marriage prospects by making such a public scene. She kept saying Uncle was just stressed about his promotion and didn't mean any harm. I told her I'd rather be alone than dead. She gasped like I'd slapped her. She left the samosas but took the chai with her. That weekend, Yusuf insisted we needed to be better prepared for emergencies. We went to 3 different pharmacies buying supplies for medical kits. We got medication organizers, timers, emergency contact cards, and bright red bags to keep everything in. We spent the whole afternoon practicing seizure response protocols. Yusuf learned how to time seizures properly using his phone's stopwatch. He practiced turning me on my side and clearing the area around me. He took notes about when to call 911 versus when to wait it out. We made laminated cards with my medication names and dosages. We put emergency kits in the kitchen, both bedrooms and the car. While organizing Mom's old closet to make room for medical supplies, I found a box I'd never seen before. Inside was her journal from when I was first diagnosed at 15. Her handwriting covered page after page describing her fights with the family about getting me proper medical care. She wrote about Uncle calling her weak for believing Western doctors. She wrote about relatives saying I was faking for attention. She wrote about crying in the hospital waiting rooms alone because no one else would come. The last entry said she'd die before letting anyone hurt me. My hands shook as I read her words about protecting me no matter what the family said. A few days later, I ran into my aunt at the grocery store. I was picking out rice when she appeared beside me. She looked around nervously before whispering that she understood why I was angry. She said Uncle's temper scared her too sometimes. She grabbed my arm and begged me not to tell anyone she'd said that. I saw real fear in her eyes, the kind I recognized from my own mirror. She hurried away before I could respond. The next week, a community elder called to arrange a family mediation meeting. He said it was important to restore family harmony before things got worse. When I asked what the meeting agenda would be, he said I needed to apologize to Uncle for the embarrassment and submit to male family authority going forward. I told him I wouldn't be attending. He raised his voice, saying I was being stubborn and westernized. More relatives called over the next few days trying to pressure me. I stopped answering unknown numbers. Aisha texted asking if I wanted to go with her to something that might help. She drove us to a community center 40 minutes away, where a support group met for people with chronic illnesses whose families didn't believe them. The room had 12 people sitting in a circle. Everyone had different conditions but the same story about family denial. One woman's husband hid her insulin. A man's parents threw away his psychiatric medication. A teenager's family performed religious ceremonies instead of letting her see doctors. Hearing their stories made me realize I wasn't alone for the first time in weeks. We exchanged phone numbers and created a group chat for emergencies. The next evening I was washing dishes when a car backfired outside. The sharp bang sounded exactly like the champagne bottles popping at Uncle's promotion party. My whole body tensed up. My breathing got fast and shallow. The room started spinning like it did before my seizure. I dropped to the kitchen floor, convinced I was about to have another one. Yusuf found me there hyperventilating. He helped me use the breathing exercises the hospital had taught us. We counted breaths together until my heart rate slowed down. He stayed with me on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes until I felt normal again. The next morning I grabbed a notebook and started writing down every phone number I could trust. Yusuf sat next to me as I made 3 columns for different levels of help. Code red meant call 911 immediately. Code yellow meant I was feeling warning signs. Code green meant I needed someone to talk to. We practiced the codes over and over until Yusuf could repeat them without thinking. He programmed them all into his phone with special ringtones for each level. 3 days later, I met with a legal aid lawyer named Narissa Lee in a cramped office downtown. She spread out forms across her desk and explained the restraining order process. Her pen tapped against the papers as she warned me that judges often didn't see medical neglect as real abuse. She kept shaking her head while reading my hospital records. The frustration in her voice was clear when she said the system wasn't built for cases like mine. That evening, Yusuf showed me a spreadsheet on his laptop with our monthly expenses broken down. If we both picked up extra shifts at work and ate rice and beans most nights, we could afford a small studio apartment across town. The numbers were tight. We'd have maybe $50 left over each month for emergencies, but we'd have our own door with our own lock. My phone started buzzing with messages from cousins I hadn't heard from in months. They all said the same thing in different ways. Uncle was telling everyone I was bringing shame to the family name. The messages got more specific about how I would regret destroying family unity. One cousin said Uncle mentioned knowing where I worked. Another said he was tracking my social media. The threats were never direct enough for police but clear enough to make my hands shake. My neurologist appointment was 2 days later. She pulled up medical journals on her computer screen showing statistics about SUDEP, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy patients. The numbers were worse than I'd known. She pointed at each study showing how missing medication doses increased the risk. This wasn't about being dramatic or seeking attention. This was about staying alive. She printed out the studies and circled the key parts with a red pen. On the way home, I stopped at a pharmacy and bought a metal lockbox with a digital code. Yusuf and I picked numbers only we would know. We put my medication bottles inside and set 5 different alarms on both our phones for pill times. We created a shared calendar where I'd mark each dose taken so he could check if I forgot. The system felt excessive but necessary. The courthouse for the restraining order hearing was packed with people. The clerk at the window looked confused when I explained medical neglect. She kept asking if there was physical violence. When I said no, she frowned and stamped the papers harder than necessary. 3 hours later, we finally got in front of a judge. He barely looked up from his paperwork while I explained what happened. He granted a limited stay-away order for 90 days but said without physical harm he couldn't do more. The order said Uncle couldn't contact me directly. Within a week, he found the loophole. Different relatives started calling and texting with his messages. The police officer I called sounded bored when he explained third-party contact wasn't technically a violation. Uncle could use anyone else to harass me as long as he didn't do it himself. The system that was supposed to protect me had holes big enough to walk through. The family WhatsApp groups went quiet about me and Yusuf. Birthday party invitations stopped coming. Wedding announcements didn't include us. Holiday dinner plans happened without anyone asking if we'd come. My aunt later told me privately that no one wanted to pick sides publicly. It was easier to just not invite us at all. The isolation hit harder than I expected. These were people I'd grown up with. People who used to care about me before Uncle made them choose. 2 weeks after the hearing, someone from the company's HR department called. They needed my official statement about what happened at Uncle's promotion party. The woman on the phone said they were documenting everything for legal reasons. I knew giving a full statement would burn every bridge with relatives who worked in tech. Uncle had connections everywhere in Silicon Valley. But I told her everything anyway. Every detail about him taking my medication. Every word he said while I was seizing. Every second his boss had to fight him to call 911. She typed while I talked, occasionally asking me to repeat something or clarify a detail. When we finished, she said my statement would become part of Uncle's permanent record if he ever tried to work in tech again. 3 days later, my phone started blowing up with screenshots from the community Facebook group, where Uncle was posting long rants about how American culture corrupts families and destroys traditional values. He never used my name, but everyone knew who he meant when he wrote about ungrateful daughters who choose Western medicine over family wisdom. The comments section turned into a war zone, with older aunties agreeing that young women today have no respect, while some younger people carefully suggested that maybe denying someone medication during a seizure wasn't exactly traditional values. I blocked the group, but screenshots kept coming from cousins who thought I should see what was being said. The next morning, 2 police officers knocked on our door saying they'd gotten an anonymous wellness check request, claiming I was being held against my will and needed help. I showed them my driver's license and medical alert bracelet, while explaining about the family situation and the restraining order paperwork. They took notes and said this kind of false report could be considered harassment if it kept happening. After they left, I knew Uncle had called them trying to flip the story and make me look unstable. That afternoon, Yusuf spread apartment listings across the kitchen table, and we went through our budget for the 10th time. We found a tiny studio 40 minutes away that we could barely afford if we both picked up extra shifts and lived on rice and beans. The landlord wanted first month, last month, and security deposit, which would wipe out our savings, but we filled out the application anyway. 2 weeks later, we got approved and signed the lease with shaking hands. Moving day came fast, and we packed everything we owned into boxes we got free from the grocery store. Uncle showed up at the house while we were loading Yusuf's car, even though the restraining order said he had to stay away. Yusuf physically stood in the doorway blocking him while I called 911 from the kitchen. Uncle kept shouting about family honor and how we were destroying everything while Yusuf just stood there silent like a wall. The police arrived within 10 minutes and gave Uncle a warning about violating the order before escorting him to his car. They waited until he drove away before telling us to document everything and call immediately if he came back. Narissa Lee met me at her office the next week with a checklist of everything we needed for the full restraining order hearing. We spent 3 hours organizing hospital records, printing Aisha's witness statement, getting the boss's testimony notarized, and putting colored tabs on the important pages. The stack of evidence grew thick enough that we needed 2 binders to hold everything. She walked me through what the judge would ask and how to answer without getting emotional, even though my hands were already shaking just thinking about it. The night before court, I was lying in bed when that familiar tingling started in my fingers. I grabbed my rescue medication from the nightstand and put it under my tongue while doing the breathing exercises my neurologist taught me. I pressed my feet flat against the floor and counted backwards from 100 while the medication dissolved. The tingling slowly faded after 20 minutes, and the seizure never fully developed, which meant my safety plan actually worked. The next morning at the courthouse, Uncle argued to the judge that controlling women's medical decisions was his cultural right as the male head of household. The judge cut him off mid-sentence, saying culture doesn't give anyone the right to endanger someone's life. Aisha testified about timing my seizure and watching Uncle refuse to let anyone call 911. The boss testified about walking into the party and seeing me convulsing on the floor while Uncle insisted I was faking. The judge asked Uncle if he had any medical training, and Uncle said real men don't need Western medicine to know when women are lying. The judge's face went completely still at that answer. After 2 hours of testimony, the judge granted a 1-year restraining order but said the evidence didn't meet the standard for criminal charges. It wasn't everything I wanted, but having legal protection for a full year felt like winning the lottery. Uncle had to stay 500 feet away from me, Yusuf, our new apartment, and anywhere I worked. The bailiff served him the papers right there in the courtroom while his face turned red with rage. Within days, the family split completely down the middle, with older relatives cutting us off while younger cousins quietly sent supportive texts. My aunt texted me privately saying she was sorry for everything and wished she was brave enough to leave, but she wasn't. I told her I understood and to stay safe. 3 weeks later at my neurology follow-up, we went through my seizure diary and adjusted my medication doses since I'd been having more warning signs lately. The doctor said stress could lower my seizure threshold, and everything with Uncle definitely counted as stress. We talked about work accommodations I'd need, like being allowed to take medication on schedule and having a safe place to recover if I had breakthrough symptoms. She wrote letters for my employer explaining that I couldn't drive until I was seizure-free for 6 months, which meant figuring out bus routes or getting rides. We made a plan for managing daily life, including keeping medication in multiple places and teaching coworkers about seizure first aid. That same week, I opened my laptop and started typing about what happened to me, creating a blog called When Family Controls Your Medicine, where I shared everything from the seizure at the party to the court hearing. Within hours, comments started flooding in from women sharing similar stories about husbands, fathers, brothers who controlled their access to medication for diabetes, heart conditions, mental health issues. One woman wrote that her father threw away her antidepressants, saying prayer was better than pills. Another said her husband locked up her insulin, claiming she was using illness to avoid housework. I stayed up all night reading and responding to these messages, realizing how many of us were fighting this same battle in silence. Yusuf came home the next day with EMT course enrollment papers, saying he'd already paid the deposit and classes started next week. He showed me the curriculum covering seizure response, medication administration, emergency protocols, everything he wished he'd known that night at the party. Word got back to Uncle through cousins that Yusuf was training to be a paramedic, and Uncle sent messages through the family WhatsApp saying Yusuf was dead to him for choosing a servant's job over family honor. Yusuf read the messages, deleted the app from his phone, and went back to studying anatomy diagrams at our kitchen table. His instructor later told me Yusuf scored perfect on every seizure-related exam and practiced CPR compressions until his arms shook from exhaustion. Meanwhile, rumors started spreading through the tech community about what really happened at Uncle's promotion party, with his former boss apparently telling the story at industry meetups as a warning about workplace liability. Aisha texted me screenshots of LinkedIn posts where people discussed the incident without using names, but everyone knew who they meant. Uncle couldn't get interviews anywhere in the valley, and cousin said he blamed me in every conversation, though even his oldest friends seemed uncomfortable defending him now. Aisha called one afternoon asking if I'd write something for her campus presentation on medical autonomy, saying she'd read it anonymously if I wasn't ready to go public at her school. I spent 3 days writing and rewriting my statement, trying to capture what it felt like when Uncle pocketed my medication while my brain started misfiring. The night of her presentation, she texted me photos of the packed auditorium, and later said 12 students approached her afterward with their own stories of family medical control. That weekend, I pulled out Mom's old recipe box and found her biryani instructions written in her careful handwriting with notes like extra saffron for celebration days in the margins. Yusuf helped me shop for ingredients at 3 different stores to get the exact spices Mom always used, and we spent hours in our tiny kitchen getting the rice layers just right. We ate together at our small table without anyone criticizing portions or demanding we serve men first, just the two of us honoring Mom's memory with each bite. The biryani tasted exactly like hers, and Yusuf said this felt more like home than Uncle's house ever did. 8 weeks passed with me taking medication at every scheduled time, tracking symptoms in my seizure diary, following every instruction from my neurologist perfectly. At my next appointment, she pulled up my brain scan results and medication levels, her face breaking into a huge smile as she showed me the stable patterns on the screen. She said maintaining therapeutic levels for a full month meant my seizures were finally under control, something that never could have happened while living under Uncle's rules. I left her office crying happy tears and immediately updated my blog with the good news, receiving hundreds of congratulations from women who understood exactly what this victory meant. Then Sylvia from Adult Protective Services called saying they'd received multiple reports about Uncle beyond just mine, including concerns from healthcare workers and community members who'd witnessed his behavior. She couldn't share specifics due to confidentiality, but said they were taking the pattern of medical neglect seriously and had opened a formal investigation that would include interviews with family members. She asked if I'd be willing to provide additional documentation, and I sent her everything including Aisha's witness statement, the boss's testimony, and my hospital records from that night. 6 months after that terrible promotion party, I was working full-time at a nonprofit that helped domestic violence survivors access healthcare, using my story to help others navigate similar situations. Yusuf passed his EMT certification exam on the first try to get hired by the county ambulance service, where he specialized in helping patients whose families interfered with their medical care. Our tiny apartment had medication organizers in every room, emergency contact lists on the fridge, and a piece that never existed in Uncle's house where every breath required mail permission. Uncle had lost his 6-figure job, his reputation in Silicon Valley, his control over us, while Yusuf and I built exactly the life Mom would have, anted, one where my medication sat openly on the counter, and no one could take it away. Thanks for letting me question things right alongside you. It's been a ride just wondering together. Until next time, take care out there. Like the video? It helps more than you think.